To replace your brake pads, you're going to need to safely lift and support your Mini and remove the wheels. If you need additional assistance with those tasks, please follow the link provided at the end of this video. This photo shows the upper protective cap being pried out of the cover for the caliper guide bolt, green arrow. There are two caps, one for the upper and one for the lower bolts. With the caps removed, you can loosen the caliper guide bolts using a 7mm hex key socket, green arrows. You don't need to remove the bolts completely from the tubes, but just enough to free the caliper from the mounting frame. This image shows the upper caliper guide bolt being removed. Using a screwdriver, pry out the retaining spring on the front of the caliper, and as always, you should be wearing your safety goggles. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove the brake wear sensor from the driver's side caliper. Replace the sensor if it has triggered the light on the dash. With the caliper guide bolts and retaining spring removed, you should be able to lift the caliper off its frame. If it's stuck on there, you can use a screwdriver to carefully pry the caliper up and off. With the caliper removed, simply pry out the brake pad out of the piston inside the caliper. Once removed, check the dust seals around the pistons for cracks or damage. Also, give the inside of the caliper a good cleaning. Support the caliper up and out of the way with zip ties or rope when you're not working on it. Never let it hang by the brake line. This can damage the line. For the rear calipers on the Mini, retracting the piston back into the caliper is a little more different than the normal method. Most cars use a separate set of brake shoes on the inside of the rotor to act as the parking brake. On the Mini, it uses the brake pads themselves to clamp down on the rotor to lock the wheel. Due to the construction of this setup, the piston needs to be rotated at the same time it is pressed back into the caliper. BMW specifies the use of a special tool to do this. However, most auto parts stores sell or will loan you a brake caliper retraction tool that fits into the holes on the brake piston as shown here. This picture shows how the rear brake pads fit into the piston. As you can see, there is a small groove running around the diameter. The new brake pad has a set of retaining wires that fit into the groove on the outside of the piston. Carefully fit the brake pad in place and push it on. Before you install the new brake pads on the front, you will need to push the piston back into the caliper. In this case, a large C-clamp works well. Make sure you seat the face of the clamp inside the piston or use one of the old pads and never press on the piston itself. Also, you will be putting fluid back up towards the reservoir as you retract the piston into the caliper. Make sure to check the reservoir and take some out if it's going to overflow. With the pistons fully retracted back into the caliper, simply push the new front brake pad into the piston until it sits firmly in place. Once you have pressed the inboard brake pad on the caliper piston, place the outboard brake pad into the caliper retaining frame. You should be able to then fit the caliper over the pad and rotor. Line up the caliper guide bolts and torque them to factory spec. This picture shows the new brake pads installed on the caliper and rotor. Be sure to reattach the caliper retaining spring once you are done. Don't forget you need to bed the brake pads to the rotor, and your braking performance will be diminished for the first 100 miles or so. Bed your pads according to the manufacturer of the pads you purchased. On the R55, R56, and R57 cars, the caliper is secured to the car with a different setup than the earlier cars. In this picture, you can see the two caliper retaining nuts being removed. Hold the inboard 15mm nut, yellow arrow, while you loosen and remove the 13mm bolt on the outside of the caliper, green arrow. Once both bolts are removed, pull the caliper up and off of the retaining frame. Once the caliper has been removed, pry the old pads, green arrows, out of the frame and pull each anti-rattle spring, yellow arrows, off the frame. Place the new anti-rattle springs at the top and bottom of each caliper frame, green arrows. Then place the top and bottom mounting ears of each new brake pad in the grooves of the spring, yellow arrows. Now place the caliper back on over the pads. Do not forget to bed the brake pads. Those of you with the R55, 56, and 57 cars will also need to reset the condition-based service CBS lights on the car if the brake pad warning light has been triggered. The light is triggered when the pads wear down enough to break the connection on the pad sensor. Once you replace the pad sensors, you need to reset the lights. Get in the car and do not press the brake or clutch pedal. Now insert the key and press the start button to turn the car on, but do not start the car. Look at the tachometer and wait until the oil service light goes out. Now press and hold both buttons on the tachometer. The car will perform a dash light check. Keep holding the buttons. The car will then show the VIN menu on the tachometer. Continue to hold the buttons until the time appears on the tachometer. Now release only the right hand button for approximately 1 second and press it again while still holding the left hand button. After another second or two, the display will show the front brake symbol. You are now in the service menu. Use the BC button on the turn signal stalk to scroll through the various service symbols until you get to both the front and rear brake symbols. To reset the service light, press and hold the BC button until reset appears. Now press and hold the button again until it resets. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another video in this series.